Reptilians, welcome and welcome back to the channel. So this week we are doing a video that was very recently requested to me and I thought it was a really good idea, so that's what we're doing. So this week we are talking all about ball python shedding and how to know if your ball python's going to shed, what to do if they're going to shed, all of those things. I have mentioned these sorts of things in previous videos like ball python care guides, but I wanted to do a video with just solely this one subject in it for those of you who have just got your ball pythons or are having issues with your ball python shedding or anything like that. I thought that I would throw this together. Hopefully it helps some of you guys out. Before we get started, this video is sponsored by iHeartGecko, so make sure to stay until the end of this video to find out all about this awesome company. Let's get started. So the first thing we're going to talk about is what to look for. So with ball pythons, a few different things are going to happen to them before they actually start shedding. Number one, a pink belly. So right before they're about to shed, ball pythons' bellies will turn not a solid pink, but it's almost like a pink patterning, and you'll know that that wasn't there before. You'll know they had a white belly before and suddenly there's all these pink splotches all over it. However, not all ball pythons may exhibit this as much as others, especially when we start talking about different morphs. So another thing to look out for is cloudy eyes. So before a ball python goes into shed, their eye caps, the scale that protects their eyes, is also going to shed. So it's going to separate itself from their eyes. So it kind of leaves them looking almost blind, and they are partially blind during this time. And this is one of the reasons that you may also notice that they get kind of defensive and hissy. They may be a little bitey during this time because they can't see. They don't know what's coming at them. They have no idea what's going on with their surroundings. To go along with that sudden temper that they may seem to have, they may also hide a lot. I know when my ball python Sylvanus goes into shed, she hides nonstop. She just got done shedding yesterday, and up until that point, I hadn't seen her in 2 weeks. She just hid the entire time. She didn't want anything to do with anyone. And not eating. Your ball python probably won't want to eat when they are about to shed, especially as adults. I know as a baby, even when Sylvanus was shedding, she would still eat because she really liked to eat. But as adults, especially when they are going into shed, they just won't take food. But usually as soon as they come out of that shed, they are ready to go. They are ready for that rat and they will take it, no problem at all. One of the reasons for this, other than them just being blind and grumpy, is because when they are about to shed, usually they also poop with their shed. So food isn't necessarily the first thing on their mind at that point. And another thing that you may notice, which isn't always the case, but it is the case with Sterling, when he's about to shed, I notice that he drinks a lot of water. He spends a lot of time in that water dish, around the water dish, just drinking water. So if you notice that your ball python is soaking themselves a lot or they're just drinking a lot of water, that is another very good sign that they may be going into shed. Overall, a ball python's color will get super dull when they're about to shed, and on some morphs this is going to be a lot harder to see than on other morphs. On Sterling, since he is a banana, he doesn't have very much black on his body, so I have to kind of look for the white areas and they'll almost turn into a light purple color. So just look for those changes in their pattern. One interesting thing about ball pythons though is they tend to go dull and belly pink and eyes gray, and then right before they get ready to shed, all of that goes away. So it almost looks like they have shed, and then usually a day or two later they will actually shed, which is always super interesting. So it's cool to look for those phases. All of these signs though can mean other things. It could mean that your ball python is sick. It could mean that they have mites or a respiratory infection or heat burns or anything like that. So make sure that if you are worried about your ball python, if that is accompanied by things like lethargy or losing weight or anything like that, you take them to the vet. But normally, for the most part, those things just mean that your ball python is getting ready to shed. Ways to help that ball python. So the first thing that you want to do is not mess with them. So if you notice that they're going into shed, especially if it's that time where they are blind, don't take them out and try to handle them. Don't try to be friendly with them, because for them, they are under a lot of stress. But one very helpful thing, if your ball python will use it is a humid hide. Now, unfortunately, Sterling, my banana ball python, will not use a humid hide. I've tried this over and over and he just acts like it's not there at all. But give your ball python a humid hide if they will use it. They'll go in there and curl up and it will help that shed come off in one piece, which is absolutely wonderful. If your ball python will use it, or if you just got your ball python, put it in there, try it. It's gonna make your life so much easier if you do. And in that humid hide, you're going to either put wet paper towels. If you use wet paper towels, make sure that you are changing them out because they do tend to mold, or sphagnum or forest moss. Those are wonderful at holding in humidity. Just make sure that if it's starting to compact down and flatten out that you change it out and just throw some new moss in there. If your ball python is like Sterling and they will not use a humid hide, when I notice he's about to shed, I take that sphagnum moss or forest moss and I put it in his hot hide because that's where he generally hangs out when he's about to shed. So I just kind of shove a bunch of wet forest moss in the back of that hide, and that is a very good replacement for the humid hide. It's just more work on your part because you have to pay attention and make sure that you're putting that in there. Other things that you can do is just raise the overall humidity of the tank. Ball pythons do pretty good in some pretty high humidity, so it's generally not something that you have to worry about, just increasing that humidity while they're shedding. You don't want to have their humidity at like 100% for their entire lives though. That is excessive and that could lead to respiratory infections. But having it a little on the high side while they're about to shed is perfectly okay. And the way that you can do that is, and I do have a whole video on this here about just raising humidity in tanks, but this is a shedding video. So we're gonna go over a lot of things here too. Number one, spray down the tank. Just get a sprayer, even a Dollar Tree water bottle, and just spray that tank down multiple times a day, or just soak it once or twice a day when you notice those shedding signs. Then once you spray that tank down, it helps so much to put something on top of the tank if you have a mesh lid. Something like a wet towel or tinfoil, plexiglass, anything like that over the top of that tank is going to do wonderful to hold in the humidity. Make sure that your animal can breathe. Don't just suffocate the entire tank out, but just cover a good portion of it. Or instead of a mister, you can get a fogger. Again, make sure you're not blasting that tank with 100% humidity, but that fogger can potentially hold that humidity up in your tank up to no more than 80%, and then you don't actually have to go in and physically spray the tank. Just make sure, again, don't blast that tank 100% of the time with 100% humidity, because then we can run into respiratory infections. Also, take a look at your substrate. If you have your ball python on something like aspen and they're not shedding correctly, then you need to change the substrate. Things like Eco Earth, Orchid Bark, Pro Cocoa, any kind of bioactive setup for ball pythons. Substrates like that are going to be much better than something like aspen because they are made to hold in that humidity, and aspen actually will mold if it gets humid. And you may also consider a tank change. So for ball pythons, mesh screen tops aren't always the best, and changing them to something like a PVC tank, even though they are a little bit more expensive, can be very, very, very helpful for your ball python. You can also keep ball pythons in very large sterilite bins. It's not going to look as pretty, but it will do really good at holding in the humidity. Another super helpful thing is baths. You can do this a couple different ways. You can take a small sterilite bin and just put a little bit of water. Make sure that your snake isn't going to drown in this water. They're just sitting in it. Put the lid on and let them soak for a little bit, or you can put them in the bathtub. If you do this, they can't escape, so make sure you are staying in there with them. And I like to put a towel under my ball python just because the bathtub is hard for them to grip. And another thing that I like to do for Sterling in that bath is put a little bit of a shedding helper into the water, or you can just spray it directly on them, and that helps too. And the very last thing, which is super easy to do, is just make sure that you have plenty of things in the tank for your snake to rub up against to help them get the shed off. So this can be driftwood, it can be rocks, just anything with a rough surface that they can slither up against to kind of help them pull that shed off. So what if your ball python has a problem shedding? Number one, do not pull on their shed. If you pull on a ball python shed, you run the risk of injuring them. You run the risk of snagging one of those scales, and an open wound equals the possibility of infection, and we don't want that. So never pull on your ball python's shed. If you are using like a shedding helper, if there is a little spot that did not come off completely, you can take a Q-tip and massage that shedding helper in and gently lift that skin. But if it doesn't come up, don't tug on it, don't pull on it, do not apply force to it, because clearly it is still attached and it's not ready, and it could result in injury. So the biggest thing to do if there's a problem is basically all the things that you would have done in helping them prepare to shed. So if your ball python sheds and they shed in a bunch of tiny little pieces, that means they didn't have a good shed, and the chances are that there are pieces still attached to them. So if you notice this, give them a bath. Soaking your ball python is going to be the biggest help in actually getting that shed off. So one of the biggest issues, if not the biggest issues, that snakes run into while shedding is stuck eye caps. And this can be serious, but it isn't necessarily a reason to panic. And I was told after I found a reptile specialist that the best thing to do, other than soaking, if soaking's not working, is to take a wet Q-tip and gently try to get it off. If there's a serious problem, take your animal to a vet. Just make sure that you know them and that you trust them and that they have a good reputation or whatever. Just make sure that they are a good vet. But that is about it. Hopefully this video was at least a little bit helpful. If you have a ball python and they are having problems shedding, hopefully this helped you out. I know a lot of you guys have ball pythons, so leave your best tips down below of how you deal with your ball python shedding, or any kind of shedding tips for ball pythons that could potentially help new owners that are scrolling through the comments. As I said in the beginning of this video is sponsored by iHeartGeckos. iHeartGeckos is such a fantastic company. They make conversion kits for animals. These conversion kits allow you to take any old aquarium that you may have laying around and turn them into vertically standing tanks for your arboreal animal. And as I was perusing through their website, they also have 2 different sizes of horizontal conversion kits for terrestrial animals. My husband and I have been thinking about doing a project with a 55-gallon and attempting to remove a glass panel and turning it into a sideways tank, and those kits look like they'd be awesome for that, so definitely something we're going to keep in mind. These kits are awesome and I love them so much. They provide so much ventilation. If you're growing plants, they do a wonderful job at keeping your plants alive and keeping that airflow going through the tank. If you do buy one of these conversion kits, make sure to leave Elle's Reptiles in the How Did You Hear About Us box, so that way they know you came from here. Thank you so much to iHeartGeckos for sponsoring this video. As always, if you have not already, please feel free to follow me on other socials and like, subscribe, and hit that bell for notifications every single time I put out a new video, which is every Sunday and some Wednesdays. This week's Instagram shout out goes to RedATK for following me on Instagram and going through and liking a whole bunch of my stuff. And this week's subscriber shout out goes to Michael Haney for always being super supportive, and he even bought one of my masks. So thank you so much to both of you guys. You are the bee's knees. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you have a fantastic day. Bye. Back to the channel. It's just not focusing. What is happening? Actually, and then this will go in what to look for. One super interesting thing though about ball python shedding. Oh, actually I didn't even, okay. Sterling, like mine, they may need shed, especially if it's at that, especially if that, so if you notice, these, why are you shifting? Stop it.